کنفرانس در پارلمان انگلستان. محکومیت قتل عام زندانیان سیاسی در سال 67 و نقض حقوق بشر توسط دیکتاتوری آخوندی. حمایت از حقوق مجاهدان اشرف و لیبرتی. افشای دروغ پردازی و عملکرد مجرمانه کوبلر.
25 years ago, almost to the date, as I said, the Muller's regime began to purge dissent by executing anyone who remained steadfast to their beliefs that the brutal regime was not representing the people of Iran and that regime change was necessary. Within 3 months, 30,000 political prisoners, the majority of whom were members or supporters of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, had been massacred. The true face of Iran's regime remains the same today: arrest, torture, and execution of political opponents lies at the very heart of the regime's campaign to hold on to power. The men in office now, including the newly elected president, were the decision makers then in the main, and they perpetrated what many considered to be the most horrific, unpunished crime against humanity since the Second World War. I am appalled, as I say, that the Secretary-General has ignored the comprehensive report of the International Committee entitled In Search of Justice, headed by the Vice President of the European Parliament, Dr. Alejo Vidal Quadras, representing 4,000 parliamentarians the world over. As many will know, our friend Tahir produced this particular book, this disturbing book, about his findings. And the book is a clear indictment of the actions of Martin Kobler and his false reports about the situation on the ground in Iraq, including the issue surrounding Ashraf. I remember Tahir telling us here in this Parliament that he was ready to go to court to defend his remarks. And he told UN lawyers who had tried to silence him, and I use his words, "Silence is not an option. Either take me to court or undertake a serious investigation." This expose makes it clear who is telling the truth. Let me tell Martin Kobler, if he feels he is right, and if he feels he's telling the truth, then he simply has to put pressure on the Iraqi government to allow visitors to Camp Liberty. Many of us have declared our readiness to go to Camp Liberty and see for ourselves. We can then make an impartial report. Why are the media not allowed to go to Camp Liberty and freely report what is happening there? Returning to the issue of human rights in Iran, we know that since Iran's election on the 14th of June, over a 24-day period, 90 individuals have been executed. In a 24-day period since the election of a new president in Iran. The Iranian regime continues to use stoning, continues to use flogging, rape, torture and public hangings to suppress the Iranian people's desire for freedom and democracy. However, in the face of such suppression, the Iranian people have remained steadfast. The new president, falsely dubbed as a moderate, should be subjected to greater scrutiny. We should remember that in the presidential debates before the election, Mr. Rouhani sold himself as a man capable of curtailing the nuclear program. Remember, this man has held many of the highest offices in the Muller's regime. He's been National Security Advisor to the President, Supreme Leader's representative on the Supreme National Security Council, a member of the regime's Supreme Defense Council, and for 2 years their nuclear negotiator. He has been a core member of the regime almost from the beginning. Rouhani is not a force for change. He's proud of his role in suppressing student demonstrations in 1999. He's been in key positions regarding the regime's terrorist activities. As Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, the President-elect of the NCRI, announced to a major international gathering in Paris only some days, weeks ago on June the 22nd, and I quote, "Nothing will change as long as freedom of expression and human rights remain non-existent in Iran. As long as political prisoners and political parties are repressed. As long as the regime's intransigent policy in Syria and Iraq remain intact. And as long as the regime insists on building nuclear weapons." And she is right. Nothing will change as long as this brutal regime continues to use terror and repression to advance its policies. My committee will work hard to expose Rouhani's false profile. We shall not rest until the residents of Camp Liberty are safe and secure. We will not cease until Iran is free and human rights are respected in that country. Together we will prevail.
Chairman, thank you. And it is a great privilege to be here with you again, and a great privilege to address you amongst my colleagues, all of whom have held your desires in their hearts and in their minds for a very long time. And as we've just heard from a most impassioned and absolutely incredible speech, we have got to keep fighting. We've got to keep letting the United Nations know what is going on and hold them responsible for what's happening to the brave people who are there. And the United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon and Under-Secretary for Political Affairs Ambassador Jeffrey Feldman should immediately stop considering Martin Kobler as a reliable source of information and instead order an independent investigation into the behaviour of Martin Kobler and Masoud Durrani. The problem here would be to find an honest investigation team within the United Nations. I never thought that I would be standing before you saying today that the United Nations needs to find an independent investigation team that we can support. Don't we hope and pray that they would always have been doing that? Of course we do. Of course we do. So we have a duty towards those residents. I would call them prisoners. We have a duty towards them to help them and to try and support them and let the world know what's going on there. Thank you very much.
Over 30,000 people, many supporters and members of the PMOI, have been executed for standing up for their beliefs in recent years, just by denouncing Islamic fundamentalism and the absolute rule of the clergy. Those very brave men and women who gave up their lives for the cause of democracy and freedom in Iran. In the last 3 decades, the absence of accountability has emboldened the regime to continue its atrocities, both by continued executions inside the country and killing its opponents outside. As Brian's already said, in the last 4 weeks alone, over 90 people have been executed. That is since the Iranian elections. Many of these executions have been carried out in public, and very sadly there are politicians in Europe and indeed in the United States who continue in their search for moderation and reformists within what many people believe to be a criminal regime. In the last 6 months alone, we've all witnessed 3 rocket attacks on Camp Ashraf. 10 residents have lost their lives, and almost 170 have been very seriously injured. These are terrorist attacks against defenceless people, residents of Camp Liberty, and this has provoked strong condemnation from members of this House and indeed overseas, but still nobody has been brought to justice, and that cannot be right. Despite the fact that the UN's assistance mission for Iraq is supposed to be monitoring the situation on the ground and in the camp. He's supposed to be defending the safety and the security of the residents, but unfortunately quite the opposite is happening, and the UNAMI have been used by the Iraqi government to pursue its own political agenda. We can't let that continue. Camp Liberty is to many a prison. It remains a very dangerous place to reside. The UNAMI, in my opinion, and indeed in many others in this room, is not doing enough to prevent this kind of attack, and particularly the missile attacks which the residents have been experiencing. It's not putting pressure on the situation to prevent these attacks, and it is allowing the Iraqi government to continue the transfer of hard hats, safety vests and other security equipment belonging to the residents of Ashraf to Liberty, which could at least reduce the number of casualties. Instead, they're blaming the residents for the situation, which they had nothing to do with, and they were put into by Martin Kobler, the UN Secretary-General, his own special representatives, by their forceful eviction from Ashraf, where they've been living reasonably peaceful to some extent for the past 30 years, but in prison-like conditions. From today, the UN should be held accountable. It should be held accountable for any future attacks that occur, because they know the threat and that they know the solution, which is to return the residents to Ashraf, which is 80 times bigger and is more secure. So while we all remember the brave men and women who have lost their lives for the cause of democracy and freedom in Iran, I'd certainly like to express my support for the struggle and can assure you that members here in this House of Parliament will continue with our endeavours to the Iranian people achieve their goals through peace and security and through their own peoples. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. And again, it's a great privilege to be amongst friends. We've already heard most of the appalling things that have happened since the sham elections. I say duplicity very firmly and advisedly, because we are witnessing a cover-up of this election that's taken place and the portrayal of a villain, this Rouhani, who's been at the centre of things, as Brian Bindley and other speakers have said, being described as a moderate. You heard of his credentials, Supreme Council, the defence. He's been part of that inner group that have been murdering, killing, suppressing and ill-treating people throughout his time. He's been in part of that core group. So I say again, be careful of the duplicity of trying. The world is now being told that this man is a moderate. What credentials for a moderate? A killer? A supporter of the hanging? And with those figures we heard earlier on, are the dreadful things that have gone on since the election. Amongst those figures is a 15-year-old child arrested and killed on his 16th, maybe he turned 16. Women taken from their homes and executed. These are the credentials of a moderate. We know that the Camp Ashraf residents were conned, using my Cockney language, they were conned into going to Camp Liberty. And all the time, that horrible person, Kobler, I don't like even mentioning his name. How on earth can somebody represent the United Nations, which is founded on the liberty of all, founded on the freedom of all? How can he be so biased and tell such outrageous lies? And I ask the Minister, if you're concerned, get our government to say, open the doors, let the lawyers, the doctors and let the physicians go in and see what's going on and come out and tell us the truth. Yeah. You won't get the truth when you lock the doors against the outside world. We saw that in the Second World War. So there has to be a little more dedication. We can still continue giving our comfort and support, if they want it, to the people of Iran. It's their business. As Madam Rajavi has said, the time has come for the Iranian people to seek the regime change that is necessary. But here, in our democracy, we have a duty to continue to put the case that this is a regime that doesn't deserve diplomatic relations or any other relations. I've started with my friends in this resistance long before the nuclear thing was ever mentioned. It's now 27, 28 years. Let's take Madam Rajavi's words. Let's put them into action. Let's say that the security of the world will continue to be threatened unless this matter is sorted out. As Iran still exports terrorism to various parts of the world, as the mullahs still suppress liberties, it's a shame on us all. It's a shame on the United Nations. And once again, we send our message tonight to Madam Rajavi, the inspirational leader of the resistance, that we are still with you, heart, spirit, and soul, and we will continue to fight. But until the day comes that you can walk into Tehran as a free person, we won't cease. We won't cease our fight, and I wish all of you that have got this responsibility to get the message across all the luck in the world. Because when you get past the age of 80 and seeing so many of my noble friends have left us since I started, so many noble lords of Lord Slynn, who wasn't mentioned, Lord Russell, we've lost some good people. But thank God we've got young people coming on, and we will win, and Iran will be free.
Well, thank you very much. It's very nice to be with you this evening. I don't think I need to go over what so many other excellent speakers have said, but I do want to just simply pose the question, what is the state of affairs in Iran? Well, we know how they paved their way to the presidential election. They did it with a path of brutality and executions. Teachers, poets, engineers, ethnic and religious minorities, anyone who dares to speak out, sentenced under fabricated charges. The Mauhare, names like Evin Prison, Semnan Central Prison, Mahabad Prison, will be imprinted on the memory of ordinary Iranians throughout the years, just like every other hellhole that's been utilised by brutal and barbarian regimes throughout the ages. We need, as we've heard, an international response to what's happening in Iran.